Hello and welcome back, I'm Joe, and this is a test for Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. Since the new update, we now have fertilizer in the field, which means our farms probably are not as simple as they were before. So today I want to figure out what farm setup is best, how many tractors, harvesters, and trucks you need, and if distribution offices are still as good as they were before. There's a lot to cover here, so I'm going to jump right into it. We're going to start with just a bunch of numbers that we need for our assumptions to make sense, and then we're going to jump right into the results of which farm setup is better. And let me tell you, there are a few setups that we're trying out today. So let's just see, where we go. So the first couple things, what are we testing? We're obviously only testing what the max number of crops is, or tonnage of crops in your silos at the end of the year. It doesn't matter how much crops you are producing, it matters how much you're actually getting collected. That's important here, important distinction. So how are we going to proceed here? I tested a few different vehicles. For example, the CK4 harvester as well as the Combine E512. The main difference is the speed and level, 24 versus 36. It sounds like a huge difference, but in the end, what does it mean? When I had a test set up with farm on 4 fields really close to each other, the 512 was able to go through 3.9 fields, so almost 4 fields, and the CK4 harvester was only able to go through 3.25 fields. What does that mean? Both of them can approximately get through 3 fields before December 3rd, which is the day when all your crops just disappear. So that's what they do, which means the E512 does a little better because it can get stuff done a little faster. So there you go, speed matters here enough, at least a difference of 12. I also compared some tractors. I compared the tractor from 1963 with a speed of 24, and then the new tractor or a better tractor from 1985, the ZT7245, speed of 28. Here, the difference, as you may expect, is not as large. And this is a little interesting because with fertilizers, we now have 3 stages or 3 things that we can do to a field before harvest. That is, first stage can be solid fertilizer, then sowing, then liquid fertilizer 1, liquid fertilizer 2, and then you harvest, and then you can technically reapply solid fertilizer, but you may not need that because solid fertilizer actually stays on the fields very, very long. Solid fertilizer gets you up to 150% fertility, this number right here, which if we look at my test, most of the areas that you see, most of the fields that we have here actually have a fertility of at least 150% or better. However, you don't get this the first year because honestly, back to tractors can only do about 10 trips per season before the harvest comes in, and that highly depends on the driving distance that they need to complete between fields and the farm, and depending on how all that stuff is set up. So that means they can do 10 trips, which I already told you 3 sessions. So fertilizer, sowing, fertilizer, or sowing, fertilizer, fertilizer. 3 sessions need to happen before harvest. So we have 10 trips. That is 3 trips each. That means 3 fields effectively, a little more than 3 fields, depending on driving distance, again, just a little bit. Now, I did find that you shouldn't count for 3 fields per tractor. It's more like 2 and a little bit, which is where the numbers get a little interesting. I have a test over here with 6 harvesters, 9 tractors, and 16 trucks. There are a couple of other tests around here too. We're going to get into all the details on the tests later on as well. But just something to consider, because if you only do 7 trips with normal length setup fields, then you should consider that, because that means your tractor is a little less efficient. So that's a tractor thing. The other thing that I checked was the Skoda 706 versus the KMZ 5410. Biggest difference is this one has a much higher speed and a little larger crop storage. Obviously, for this one to actually work, you need the asphalt roads. With the gravel roads, you're not going to have enough max speed to make that matter. And then, yeah, there's a little extra space, but it also means a little extra space means it takes a little longer to load when they're on the field. This makes a tiny difference that usually gets made up with, depending on the distance, really fast. But the setup that I had, and I will show you that once I'm done talking about all these guys, is both trucks were able to do 93 trips, and they were just effectively almost full, which means the Skoda was moving about 930 tons, and the KMZ was closer to 1,100 tons of crops on the short distance. That's interesting because both combines were bringing in about 2,000 tons of crops. What does that really mean? A fully fertilized field at 200% can produce close to 600 tons. Not exactly, it's like 575 to 580. It's not a perfect number every year, but around that range. So let's say about 600 tons of crops per harvester. That is very important because we just said the Skoda on short distance was moving 930 tons and the KMZ was moving about 1,100 tons. That means I need at least 2 of the Skodas. 3 is probably better, but at least 2 of the Skodas. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to collect everything for that one harvester, and you usually have more than one harvester running around. For the KMZ, it's a little clearer that 2 should get you pretty close to the full harvest of the combine. So there is that. With all of those numbers done, let's look at our setups a little bit, because it does matter how you do things for the farms. One thing we have to understand is a tractor and a combine will stay out as long as they have fuel, unless it's fertilization steps. For fertilizers, they always come home, at least so far from what I've seen. But for sowing and for harvesting, they will stay out as long as they have fuel. Now, a tractor can usually do, tractor and harvester, can usually do one full large field and then has about 30 or 40 liters of fuel left to make it to another field to do the same thing. But it has to be in driving range. So if they can't make it there with the fuel that's left, they can't go out there. So when you set up your fields, make sure that you set up with that in mind. So what I did, I tried to make it so that a harvester and a tractor could always finish a field and then go to the next one before going back to the farm. In this case, I did something like this. We have seven tractors and harvesters here. I did field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then for the second round, which you want to keep them in range, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Because now, none of those vehicles should have to come back to the farm right away. You can add fuel stations if you want, but it's not totally necessary. But that can help your driving distance piece there a little bit. Something else that I wanted to try, because we talked about that in the previous best farm setup as well, medium fields. Are they better? The thing with medium fields, as you can see here, we're already done with sowing at almost 60%, so 2/3 is almost done. And here, we're barely at 1/5. So the medium farms will be done a lot sooner, which means they start growing sooner, which means they're ready to harvest sooner, which means you're taking these fields, the load of these fields from your trucks to actually do something. You get started sooner, so you get finished sooner, and that can help you with your yield as well. You can do this with 1 or 2 medium fields. I'm only doing 1 here, but I think a second round of medium fields may also be just fine. And then I just have a bunch of different setups. We're going to start down here. We have a 22 field, 6, 9, 16. The first number is always a tractor. Sorry, first number is always the combine, second number is a tractor, and the third number is the truck. So 22 fields. There's also 22 fields, 6, 6, 18, 22 fields, 7, 7, 16, and then 7 medium fields and 20 large fields, 7, 7, 16, 10 large fields, 3, 3, 6, and another 3, 3, 6 just with the medium farms replaced. Then I have this humongous setup over here with 45 fields, 4 distribution offices, that's 48 trucks, and a 15-15 setup. And then over here we have a 1540 with 15-15 tractors and harvesters. Over here, 22 large fields. We have now a medium farm with 6-6, just seeing if that matters, and we have the distribution offices. Now, obviously, distribution offices have a clear limitation of only allowing 20 assignments per distribution office. That has to include your drop-off zone. So for this to work, you have to assign your distribution offices clever enough, and you do enough that you can cover everything. Over here, we just have a couple medium fields also thrown in the mix, and then we have a couple more interesting ones. Here, the same setup with 7 medium and 20 large with a 690 and 2 distribution offices. Here we go on 618, that is 18 tractors, as well as over here we're going with 6 and 12. So we're going to see which one of these yields the best results at the end of this. All right, it looks like we are done with all fertilization for all the fields, and here's something that I will tell you right away. The farms need to have maxed out liquid fertilizer and solid fertilizer. Solid fertilizer we're currently getting from this battery of distribution offices from everywhere. But if they're not full, tractors will just go home and then they won't go back to that field. So if you run out of fertilizer, they stop that whole process and you're not going to get all the bonuses that you want. What are our current stages or our current values of fertilization? Again, 200% is max, and it looks like we are at about 190 or more on this one down here. Let's see. We are not that high over here on this setup with a different ratio. We're looking at 150 through 180 or so. Then on this setup up here, we're doing fine. They're closer to 180 and 190 or in that range. Gotta check something here. Yeah, fertilizer is sitting there. If you purchase them, auto-purchase them, they don't fill up instantly, so there is a chance that you just run out of fertilizer at times. Yeah, this setup looks fine, and then we are close to 180, 190 on average on most of the other fields, which is just important to know because that's something that will play into our results later on. Now, I was fiddling with this to figure out if I can get all the fields to 200% fertility every single time. And the answer to that may lie up here, because as you can see, these fields are all close or at 200%, but these are the ones that have special ratios. They don't have a one-to-one tractor to harvester ratio, which is really the important thing to note here. So the 690 has all 200%. Now, this one is not quite 200%, but there are probably reasons for them. Over here, we have everything at 200% at 612. And then over here at 618, obviously, we also have everything at 200% because that ratio is higher. That is the same farm setup as this, and we can see the difference is quite significant because we have probably up to 40% difference in some of these fields, which I find a little remarkable. Now, number-wise, what should we expect for harvest? I already said earlier, 600 tons is approximately what we can see from a large field. In reality, it's 580. And then the medium fields, if you want to math it out, are exactly a third of that number. So if you say 580, then a third of that is 193, which if we just want to round things, how about we say 175 for the medium field and 550 for the large field? The only thing that is supposed to do is give us a starting number of how much grain we're supposed to have, because I cannot look at my productions over here to say how much we actually produced, because this is already counted before it gets hauled in. That's all the stuff that's on the fields. You can also do your own test and figure it out yourself, but let's say 550 for the large field and 175 for the medium field. So that's our max yield for all of these farms. Now you can see that the farms with medium fields are already done with the medium fields, and there is not a lot left over on the fields, which is actually really good. And something that I want to show you, yeah, there's a little traffic jam going on over here, and we have to be aware of that. But the worst traffic jams are, and it hasn't happened yet, are here because they're just starting. I'm guessing we see some more traffic jams over on this side. Yes, they're already parked there. If you have 48 trucks running around on 55 fields, you're going to have to organize your roads very specifically so that nobody blocks your harvesters and nobody blocks your trucks. So this is an added disadvantage by using a lot of distribution offices for a humongous farm setup. I'm not saying this is super realistic. Once you get to the smaller farm setups, you are generally okay, but it's still a consideration just in general for all your traffic. So let's let these run to the end, and then we'll see at the beginning of November how we're doing, because that should give us a good idea of how many crops are left on the fields in the different setups. We have reached middle of November. We are just before snow. It's already cold outside, and this should now give us a pretty good indication of what is going on there. My computer was lagging there a little bit, so I had to adjust a couple things. But how we're doing, let's just pause here because this is really what we want to look at. This is my gold standard. Let's start here with the 7716, which is really just doubling the trucks plus 2 extra ones because there was room in the farm. We have on average a lot left. 30 tons, 60 tons, 70 tons, 70 tons, 100 tons. That is a lot considering that a truck can only transport 13 tons at a time. So this is about 9 trips or 8? Yeah, 9 trips. This is 6 trips, 8 trips, I think, or 7 trips. Like that, there's a lot of trips left over here, and there's still fields that we are just starting to harvest. So there's actually a lot of leftover grain sitting right here. Over on this side, with the 6618, that is 3 trucks per harvester, it actually looks a lot better. We effectively only have grain left on the fields that are currently actively being worked on. That doesn't mean we're working on every single field, but that is a pretty good indication. Over here, we have a 6916, more tractors, but it doesn't look like we're actually, well, we haven't picked up everything yet. Most fields still have at least 1 truckload left over. Then we're looking here on the medium farms, the medium mixed with the large fields, which is the same size as everything going on over here. I think on average, we have a little less, but there's still a lot of grain sitting on all of these fields. Let's go to the smaller farms. The smaller farms look like they have a reasonable shot at collecting everything, which is important here. And then the smaller farm with medium fields feels like it's pretty much the same. Actually, it's a little bit behind according to those 2 fields right there. So that's interesting. Let's move on to the next ones. This is the humongous farm. And this one I would expect has a lot of grain left on the fields. But on average, it may be just, I don't know, 80 or 60 tons per field times 45 is still a lot of grain, but it's not as bad as I probably would have expected it right away. Looking at the next one, this is where the medium field started, and we had higher traffic jam, congestion. It looks like just about the same, maybe a little more. On the 22 fields with 660 with distribution offices, this one looks pretty solid because I barely see anything left over if you want to set it up this way. So that's nice. So that's more a question of how many tractors do you need in comparison. The next one where we have medium fields sitting here instead of 2 large fields. Same thing, almost nothing is left over. Now looking over here, I'm expecting the same thing because we have the same distribution setup. So that is fine. There's one field over here that has quite a bit of grain still sitting on it. That's quite surprising, but that's all right. And yeah, they both look fine for what I can tell. I hope we can actually fit everything in those fields as we want to. Cool. There are 2 extra fields sitting here still that haven't been touched yet in this setup, but we'll figure that out too. What's your fertility? 194. So yeah, they actually have a pretty high yield, but we may not have enough stuff left over. Let's let these complete, and by December 3rd, we'll be back and figure out who is the winner. So we're December 2nd, it's just ticking over to December 3rd, and in just a couple hours, we should see all the fields that still had any harvesting, active harvesting going on, tick over to black, just like this. I guess December 4th. I was wrong. So that's our number. Of course, it's snowing right now, but we're going to let all the trucks get home. And once the trucks are home, we can take our tally, because at this point, everything that's left on the fields would have withered or disappeared or done something else to it, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. Let's pause and see what we see. All right, grain. Tell me what we got. Over here, we have 22 fields. If we assumed about 580 or even 560 or 550 tons per field, then we should expect 12,760 tons of grains. We know that we had not 200% fertility on these fields, so it's less than that. So even if we say 550, we're still talking about 12,100 tons of grain. These guys have collected about 43 times 2, so 8,600 plus a little bit here, so 86 or 8,700 tons of grain. Not a lot. Okay, interesting. If we go over here, let's turn this thing off. If we go over here, it is very similar. It's not, it's barely a difference or no difference at all. It's almost the same to the ton. I'm actually surprised because I ran this now 6 times, and each time the medium farm was actually a little better than that. But this time, not the case. They are pretty much the same. Over here, we have a farm with less than half the amounts of fields, has about, well, a little less than half the amount of crops that were collected over there. And on this side, we effectively get the same number, 4173 versus 4150. really runs out to the same thing, and then whatever's in the farm is really the same thing. I'm looking at the central ones first because these are the ones that are most predictable. Then we have the 45 fields over here with about 10,700 tons of grain, which we have 45 fields. You can math out that this is not the full amount, so it's about half. It's about 50% is what our collection rate really is. Same thing over here. They did a little better this year, it looks like, but it's very comparable. Again, a lot of traffic jams, and that's a problem. Here is the interesting one. We have the 22 large fields with just 660, and they had 160, 170% fertility. And the number here is very comparable, 8,300, to the number here. It's just a little less, but not a lot less. Don't forget there's about 50 tons sitting here. So 8,300 versus 8,500. So this one did just a little bit better, but it also had one extra harvester and one extra tractor. And the setup is just supposed to utilize the medium farm to the max. So that's the difference, but it's really close, and I'm pretty sure that this did not leave much or anything on the fields because that's what we looked at earlier. Same thing over here, but the medium farm looks like, or with the medium farms, we got 200 extra tons of crops. And maybe that matters. Maybe that matters to some of us. Let's look at the other setups. We have 6 tractors and 113. That's really set up here. 1 harvester, 1 tractor, 3 tractors. We collected about 7,500 tons of crops, which this one is really very close in comparison to this one because 6,600, and then we have 24 instead of 18. But that is a huge difference. This one collected a lot more crops than we got out from here. So that's an interesting observation because the distribution office won out in this setup. So that's cool. That's interesting. Down here, I think this one is very interesting. It actually uses 3 extra tractors and less trucks, but it collected just a little less than the 113 setup. So just having a couple extra tractors did not save you anything. I don't think there was a lot of extra grain sitting on the fields here, but just looking at them, they're very the 112 setup. Well, no, it's not, because 16 doesn't really work with 6. So you know what I mean. The 6,916. There you go. The 6,618 did just a tiny bit better for the same setup. Cool. Let's look at the more interesting ones for me. These guys are probably my favorites, and I want to see what the actual difference is. I am actually a little surprised, but let's see what we get here, because they're not 100% full, which means there was still room for other crops to come in here if we wanted them. But 10,373 tons in this setup with 7 medium and 20 large fields should yield about 12,000 tons of crops if we have 200% fertility, which these fields did go pretty close to that. They're a little less because, let's say 575. This is a high 90% collection as well as here, and this one is even higher. So I'm surprised to say, and I didn't expect this, the super high tractor utilization actually enables you to collect most of the stuff because A, things get sown really fast, and B, you have a chance of actually fertilizing every single field that comes out of this. So in this setup, not by a huge margin, but a little better is the 618 setup, but the 69 setup seems to do just fine, and the 612 setup is just a little better than the 69 setup. So the 1 to 2 or the 1 to 1.5 setup seems to do almost the same thing. You do need the large farm for that, otherwise you don't have enough room. You need 15 vehicles here instead of 12. But there's that. And what's the increase in stuff just by adding 3 extra tractors to the same setup, which is over here? Almost 2,000 tons of crops. 3 extra tractors, everything else the same, gives you 2,000 extra tons of crops. Now compare this setup, the 45 farms with a lot more vehicles, just got you a little more than that, just a little more than this, and it actually has less than a 618 setup. So I think that is interesting because there are a couple other things that you can do here. You do not, and I don't say this lightly, you still have 6 spots in here for more trucks. You can also go here where you have 12 more slots for trucks. That is one full distribution office that you wouldn't even have to worry about. So you could optimize this a little more by moving your distribution office trucks into the farm, and you get pretty close to the collection that you need. You just need another distribution office to help you out a little bit. And because you only have 27 fields, you can just tell the distribution office to concentrate on all the large ones, and you should be able to collect all your crops pretty evenly. So a 1, 2, and then what do we have here? We have, well, 12 trucks would be in there. It's a 2, and then we have another 2. It's almost an 1, 2, 4 setup. 1 combine gets 2 tractors and 4 trucks. I bet if you do a 1, 2, 3 setup, 1 combine, 2 tractors, 3 trucks on average, you would still get to this number. So that's what I wanted to know. That's what I wanted to figure out, which of these setups are still good. And yes, the distribution offices are still good, but I would argue you can combine them just like this. You can also expand this a little bit because you can see there are some free spaces here. You can line up your fields a little different if you want to. There's definitely an opportunity to add 1, 2, 3, 4 large fields here. You can do a lot of things with this setup specifically, as long as you keep your driving distance low and your traffic congestion low, because traffic is the stuff that kills you. All 3 of these, however, with the more tractors than harvesters, seem to have a better yield than any of the other setups that I have if you want to use distribution offices. Obviously then here, if I said the 612 was good, you can probably get a lot more done with the 6-9 setup. The only problem with the 6-9 setup is you only have space for 15 trucks, and 15 trucks, we tried that down here. Apparently I wrote the wrong number down. 15 trucks, the setup that we have down here did not yield as much as the next one. So just be aware of that. That's what happened here. I think that's it. We could rerun this experiment, and I will one more time. Yeah, I will one more time and see if the numbers are significantly different than before, because every year your fertility changes just a little bit. Everything turned to dust. So where are we now? We are at about, well, 11,000, a little over 11,000. Earlier we were a little over 10,000, just to compare. So 11,000 here, dozens of tons more over here on the 18 setup, and again, dozens of tons more over here, which I find interesting. These were all close to 200%. This one had the highest percentage out of all the farms or all the fields, but over here it seems like we're really only losing about 200 tons, which is really insignificant if we look at it's double the tractors. So the 1, 1.5, and 4 trucks seems to be okay. Again, in this setup we do have another 15 slots for distribution for trucks, so we just need 1 distribution office adding another 12 trucks, and we are golden. Just comparing that the other numbers are still similar, it looks like the answer is yes. And this setup over here, the 45 farms, is actually still underperforming below all of these, so even having that many more fields and trucks did not make a difference. The huge farm is just another thing that we should do. The other farms all performed clearly less. Now we're at almost 3,000 below the threshold that we saw before. 4,700 here, 4,600 here. Yeah, the other farms just don't keep up. They don't have enough trucks, but more important, well, they do have enough trucks generally, but when they do have enough trucks, they don't have enough tractors. So our vanilla farms, as we have them today, need to provide space for a 1, 1.5, and 4 setup if you want to always collect everything you have. I would say a 1, 2, 3 setup is probably fine. A 1, 1.5, 3 setup for trucks is probably also fine. Just depends a little bit on your driving distance and how many extra fields you want to add, because there is a lot of space here. If you set it up like I have it here, there's nothing that stops you from using the space that's right here for 1 more section, because the farm is already pointed that way, so it's a relatively short distance, and you can easily add 1 more group, so 1 tractor, 2 tractors and 1 harvester in there, and then you just get another 1,500 tons on top of everything that you're already doing. There are more ratios here, but I think the main thing that I wanted to get out of this is the ratio for harvester, 1, tractor, 1.5 or 2, and truck, at least 3, make it 4. That's the ratio that we want, and a distribution office can help you accomplish all of that. And once you have only one distribution office, just figure out how many farms you want. But this is what I wanted out of this. I hope this is what you guys were looking for. There's a lot more setup going into all of this now than there ever has been, especially with the fertilizer, especially with the solid fertilizer here. Don't forget that if you have fields that had leftover crops sitting there from the previous year, the crops turn into fertilizer. And it looks like these two fields we just started doing something on, or we just started harvesting, and then the distribution offices were not able to get them. Thank you very much, and that is all I had. I hope this helped someone out there, and it definitely helped me because I thought 111 is still fine and 112 is probably okay, but that was not the answer. Hope you liked this. Took me a long time to make this, and I hope I will have more tests and tutorials coming up in the future because now the new branch is updated and things are a little more stable. Thank you. Bye-bye.